biggest medical lab companies in the country, has offered to provide free DNA collections that may ultimately connect some of those bodies that have been recovered to a real identification. I spoke to one young woman earlier this evening who is looking for her godmother.
This is the only way that they can identify. So we've come in with hairbrushes, toothbrushes. Her brother took a saliva sample for DNA, and everyone's willing to do anything, but it's just a matter of waiting.
Now, LabCorp, as I mentioned, is one of the biggest medical lab companies across the country. They have 900 centers around the United States, and they've offered a number that relatives can call who are not in New York City, who don't have access to this particular armory and some of the sources here. And that number is 888-520-6952. I'll repeat that again, 888-520-6952. There's been an incredible outpouring of emotion at this particular location as New Yorkers try to get back to what they believe is a sense of normalcy. But while some of us are thinking about what happens next, there are still so many people who are thinking and focused on perhaps what was. Michael.
Sense of normalcy, as you say, Michael. It's going to be a while before that comes back, and it'll probably be a different normalcy. You know, I've been noticing a lot of young people out there, a lot of young people in New York City wearing the red, white and blue. You know, the younger generation, Generation Y, Generation X, whatever you want to call it, haven't been known for their patriotism in this day and age. Tell me your impressions.
My impressions are this, that that the impact, what has been felt by what happened just some blocks south of where I'm standing, knows no boundaries. It knows no color distinction. It knows no ethnic distinction. It knows no age distinction. New Yorkers are not known for being a compassionate lot. But if you walk around this town, as I have in the past 3 or 4 days now, everybody has been hit with this compassionate feeling. Just on my way down here, I saw a group of people who were standing and singing, and it looked like it was a group of people who didn't really know each other. They had come by, and some shop owner had his television tuned into CNN. People were watching it, and another group next to them started singing. There are so many stories like that across the city, and they involve all kinds of people of all ages and of all colors.
You're seeing it up close too, Michael Oakley. Thanks very much. Now, I want to tell you that our internet website provides a special service for those seeking information about people missing after the attacks. You can post the person's name, also their picture on our website. You can see one of them there. Information on the missing can be sent to us here at missing@cnn.com. Obviously, that's an email address. Okay, now let's update you on the latest developments as we know them at the moment. The grim task of clearing debris from the fallen Twin Towers goes on in New York City. These are live pictures now. Mayor Rudy Giuliani says authorities are taking it day by day and deciding when the operation switches from a rescue to a recovery mode, as we've been discussing in the last few minutes. And more promising news on the investigative front. A Justice Department official tells CNN a second person has been taken into FBI custody in New York. Now, that man is considered a material witness in the terror attacks, as was the earlier man arrested. President Bush is continuing to draw up plans for a US response to the hijackings. Mr. Bush met Saturday with his national security advisors at Camp David. He also called the leaders of Mexico and Spain as part of his effort to build an international coalition against terrorism. Colleen.
All right, Michael. Well, should the United States decide to launch an offensive, and if that offensive is against Afghanistan, that is going to create its own challenges in and of itself. It's a mountainous country, far removed from most U.S. allies. The closest and most likely launching place for any attack is Pakistan. And Pakistan's President, General Pervez Musharraf, has pledged to help the United States, but on the other hand, his is one of the few countries to actually maintain ties to Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. Well, 2 veteran diplomats say that dealing with terrorists in such a conflict would call for a new and demanding style of war.
This time around, we have a lot of enemies. We know some of them. We will find out more of them. They have an interlocking network. There's no question about that. And it's going to be much tougher to get at them. And it's going to be therefore a much more complicated and long-term effort. The Iraq war was over in 6 weeks, whatever it was. That will not be the case this time. This is going to take some years to accomplish. And you have to hope and pray that the president can lead us all for that period of time and keep the support up.
Countries have to be put on notice that safe havens for terrorists will no longer be accepted by the United States. These terrorists cannot undertake the actions that we have experienced last week unless they have a base from which they operate, unless they have an organization, communications. It takes a long planning. And we cannot permit them the period of quiet in which they prepare and then they strike us.
Well, officials in Washington keep suggesting that the investigation does point to Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden. So attention is turning to Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. The fundamentalist Islamic militia is believed to be giving bin Laden sanctuary. Mind you, the Taliban have said that they don't believe that bin Laden could have had anything to do with these attacks. It's a poor country, they say. It would be impossible to train pilots there. Meanwhile, fighters in the opposition Northern Alliance are mourning the death of their leader. A bomb attack last week mortally wounded Ahmad Shah Massoud. And Steve Harrigan joins us now by our video phone from northern Afghanistan with more on this. Steve?
Colleen, a very emotional funeral is just unwinding here in remote northern Afghanistan. Thousands of Afghani villagers traveled from all around, many of them on foot, to pay their last respects to Ahmad Shah Massoud. Mr. Massoud, of course, fought first the Soviets and then the Taliban for more than the past 20 years. So a very emotional day here. His body arrived by helicopter. People were throwing roses on it, flowers, wailing, crying. A most emotional day here in remote northern Afghanistan. Now, as you know, Mr. Massoud was assassinated by a television camera that exploded just before the terrorist attacks in the United States. So what they're saying here, his supporters say that those two events are linked. They say the assassination of their leader is closely tied to the terrorist attacks in the United States. And we have the unique situation here of opposition figures in northern Afghanistan calling for military action against their own country. We've talked to high officials here in the Islamic State of Afghanistan. They say they want military action by the United States in Afghanistan against the Taliban. They say they are ready to join in that fight, fighting side by side with U.S. soldiers should those events come to pass. Colleen.
Steve, how strong is this opposition? Help us understand exactly where it fits here.
It is a shifting coalition. They say they have about 15,000 regular fighters ready to go, perhaps as many as 15,000 irregulars who would join them as soon as possible. They control about 5 to 10% of the country, and mostly they're located here in one of the most remote places on Earth, a very mountainous, desert-like culture of northern Afghanistan. So the question for the opposition here is, how will they fare after the assassination of their charismatic leader, Massoud? Will they be able to bind together and form a new leader? And eventually, will they be able to take part in any operations should they come against the Taliban? Those questions still unanswered. Colleen.
You know, Steve, there's a lot of discussion right now in the United States about the difficulties that Afghanistan would create if there were to be some sort of military action and if it were to be against Afghanistan. You know a lot about that. You know the kinds of problems that the Soviets had there. What would be the challenges?
Certainly anyone visiting Afghanistan, walking around here, looking at this terrain, it becomes readily apparent just what an enormous undertaking it would be to carry on a war in this kind of terrain. Also, history, as you mentioned, the Soviet Union fought for 10 years here against the Afghanis and were driven out. That defeat really in some ways helped to bring about the fall of communism in the Soviet Union. So they failed for 10 years. Now, could the U.S. or could a coalition of Western nations do any better here, and what would the stakes be? History shows it would be a very tough fight indeed. And the question is whether or not the Afghani opposition would help in such a fight. They say that they've been fighting the Taliban for more than 5 years. They say they've already lost thousands of lives in that fight, and they say they have the experience and the knowledge to help the U.S. or a Western coalition that perhaps might fight in Afghanistan. But so far, contacts between the two sides, according to opposition figures here, have been minimal. Colleen.
CNN's Steve Harrigan in northern Afghanistan for us. Thanks. Michael, over to you now.
OK, Colleen, thanks very much. Pakistan and Iran both say they'll take steps to seal their very long borders with Afghanistan. Both countries are at risk of receiving a flood of refugees in the event of any United States military strike on Afghanistan. Some Afghanis are already anticipating the strike. They're leaving their homes. Western aid agencies have already pulled out of Kabul, further worsening the situation for displaced Afghanis. Meanwhile, there are 8 international aid workers who have been caught in the middle of all of this. They are being held in Taliban custody, accused of attempting to convert Muslims to Christianity. Now, with the possibility of a military strike against Afghanistan, family members fear the detained aid workers may be in greater danger than ever before. Sheila Cast has that.
24-year-old Heather Mercer was excited last spring about going to Afghanistan with a Christian aid group.
She was trying to think of ways that she could really blend into the culture, and she just really wanted to immerse herself in another culture.
But within 5 months, Mercer and 7 other Westerners were arrested, charged with trying to convert Muslims to Christianity, a very serious charge in Afghanistan. And then this happened.
To the extent that governments such as the Taliban government in Afghanistan support such things, you need to understand you cannot separate your activities from the activity of these perpetrators.
Afghanistan, where Mercer is on trial, is at the top of the potential target list for U.S. military retaliation because of Afghanistan's support for Osama bin Laden, the top suspect in the terror attacks.
So on Thursday, U.S. and German diplomats pulled out of Afghanistan, along with United Nations and some Red Cross workers. There is no one from the U.S. there to continue negotiations about Mercer and the other American, Dana Curry.
Even Heather's mother, Deborah Oddie, who had just arrived in Afghanistan on Tuesday, was forced to leave. Her head covered as required, she told reporters it was, quote, devastating to leave after just one visit with her daughter.
It sounds like she's in a dangerous situation as it is. And now with what's happened in the last week, that's heightened.
Everyone's prayer is that just God brings her through this safely. She's expelled from the country. That's our best hope.
To be expelled rather than forgotten as the United States decides the next step in its new war on terrorism. Sheila Cast for CNN, Washington.
Well, President Bush is leaving little doubt about what the attacks mean for the United States. And as Kelly Wallace reports, he now faces the challenge of maintaining public support as he goes ahead and plans a response.
Spending the weekend at the secluded presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, President Bush huddles with his national security team and prepares the American people for war.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly.
The president refuses to discuss military options, but for the first time, he specifically named suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect behind Tuesday's terrorism spree. Bin Laden is believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan, with the ruling Taliban government providing him safe haven.
This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring him to justice.
When asked if those words mean President Bush is considering using ground troops to attack terrorists, aides say nothing has been ruled out. But winning this so-called war and finding the elusive bin Laden won't be easy, says a former Clinton administration official.
We're not fighting a military, we're not fighting an organized power, but we're fighting a very diffuse and shadowy organization that has links in many different parts of the world.
Knowing Americans are hungry for swift retaliation, the president uses his radio address to say a sweeping response will come in time.
You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short.
You will be asked for resolve for the conflict